experience this? Amon, nag-story ko iban si mga bagay mo. And then, you were laughing, exchanging jokes, and then so sudden, bigla na lang naging silent. And then, nambuk ba kayo mo tumindog, walk out. Yun, nag-walk out queen siya. So, kamo naman, parang you look at each other, parang na-confused, and then, wala lang. You forget about it. Then, the next day, someone will tell you, syempre yung friend mo na may takay mo, na inba kayo mo, yastulan pala kayo mo. And then, you were like, what? May ta? Then, long simbagay mo kasi, na-hurt daw siya. Ikaw naman, you know, na-hurt how, no? Habis saram. So, parang kiblaan ka. Kasi, halong pikilan mo, may ta siya na-hurt. Unin na bisara mo. Naka-experience na ko yan, Bian. Okay. Ang tawag sa ganon, misinterpretation, misunderstanding, or should I say, distorted messages, whatever you call it, that is actually barriers to effective communication. Hati niya, huwag ka mo naghati. Okay? Hi everyone! Assalamualaikum! Welcome back to my channel, The Nervous Speaker. So for today's video, we are going to talk about the 4 common barriers in effective communication. Okay, barriers. So pag sinabing barriers, amo niya tulang yung nagbablock. Okay? Now, we all know that effective communication is the cornerstone of any successful relationships, be it personal or academic, and productive environments. And yet, many of us fail because of the barriers. We fail to communicate our ideas, our thoughts, and our listeners or our audience failed to receive correctly yung message natin clearly as what we intended. So, yun. So, what happened? Ang tawag sa ganun, may nangyari in between along the process of communication. A barrier occurred. So, ano tong barrier? So, for today's video, we are going to explore the common barriers in effective communication. So, we're just going to talk about 4. So, ano tong 4 na to? We have psychological, then we have linguistic and cultural, and then we have physical, and then the last one is mechanical barrier. So, let's talk first about psychological. So, uning psychological. Kasi pag sinabing barrier, it can take in many forms. It can either be external or internal. So pag sinabing psychological, that is internal barrier. So example ng psychological barrier is yung mga prejudices natin or yung mga personal biases. Psychological is that preconceived notion of others based on their gender, on their cultural background, on their beliefs, values, or on their religion, or based tribe nila. Yun. So, yun ang tinatawag nating prejudices, right? So, sometimes kasi, we refused to listen to other people pasal parang close na in pikilanta. Panal ta kasi, nag-a-assume na kita. Na just because we have heard people saying, or sometimes we have heard it from our parents or from our ancestors or from even friends. You have that prejudice na just because aw nako-assumption, magpatausog, papanganal mo, kana nga mato di miyata panganal, yun. So that's actually one barrier na dapat i-avoid natin, di ba? And then another psychological barrier is yung lack of confidence. Nakatry na ka mo na parang inside the classroom, okay guys, mga students siya, parang the teacher will ask a question, tapos you know the answer. But because you don't have confidence in yourself, feeling mo masakaw or, di mo kaingatan, correct ba nito di? So, you did not raise your hand. And then, merong another brave soul raised his or her hand. And then, yung answer niya, tugmang-tugma talaga yung answer mo. So, yun. Okay? Another psychological barrier example is strong emotions. Pag pinapauna natin yung strong emotions natin, like for example, sadness, anger, or stress, so medyo illogical na kita. For example, naka-notice ko, bangko yes tulan, you say things that you do not really mean. Di ba? Kaya nga long nila bang kita yes tulan, dapat di kita magbisara. Why? Pasal, yung mga bisara mo talaga, parang medyo unreasonable siya. So, communication barrier din yan too. Kasi you cannot give exactly yung response na appropriate interaction mo because of your strong emotions. Ibig sabihin, masyado kang nadala ng emotions mo. Then another example of psychological is yung mga negative attitudes towards the subject matter. Sometimes, when people felt threatened or sabihin natin na parang feeling nila that they have to be under defensive. Either they fight back, aggressive sila. So, yes tulan ko, as tulan di siya. So, what happens to communication? Wala. Or, magwi-withdraw siya. Ibig sabihin, he or she keeps quiet. So, ikaw yung nag-ama, inchaway rin siya bisara. So, wala rin communication kasi walang response. So, that's also a barrier. So, these are psychological, internal siya. So, what will you do with that? Siyempre, if, for example, you are experiencing these barriers, for example, you are in a conversation, tapos, you need to check yourself. Mang sa feeling mo, parang hindi ka masyadong confident, you have to, tell yourself, kaya mo yan, di ba? Kasi pag hindi ka magta-try ngayon, if you will not speak up now, kailan pa? Number 2, if you're angry, if you're sad, or sabihin na natin, you're emotionally not feeling good. So, siguro yung pinakamarayaw is, shut up. Ayoko magbisara. Kasi any decisions you will make, when you're angry, when you're sad, or you're not feeling good, it's actually a bad decision. And then, yung prejudices naman natin, self-correct lang. I'm also guilty of that. You just need to correct yourself. Now, you need to remind yourself that every people's opinion, every perspective is significant. So, the next time you are in a conversation, although you don't disagree with his or her opinion, okay lang. Be respectful. Yun. So, number 2, ano yung next barrier natin? With this is yung tinatawag nilang linguistic and cultural barrier. With linguistic and cultural barrier, yung first is language differences, linguistic. Well, this is actually pretty normal. For example, if two people interact tapos they speak two different languages, syempre, di sila maghati. So, ano yung gagawin nila? They have to find a common language that they can both understand. Tama? Kung minsan nga, yung language differences natin, sometimes even if you claim na pareho kayong Tausug, di ba, na-observe niyo, for example, somebody will say, I'm Tausug, pero I grew up in Bungao, and then there's someone who's also Tausug, but who grew up in Manila, or there's also another one, Tausug, who grew up in Holo. But when they speak up, they have different accents. Dugay-dugay yung pagbisara nila. That's also language variation, di ba? Pero they're still Tausug, pero still, yung isa na lumaki sa Holo, medyo pag magbisara Tausug or Sinug, very deep talaga. Then here comes yung Tausug na who grew up in Manila, maglamod-lamod na yung bisara niya. Diba? Tapos in Hambuk Saberi, Tausug who grew up in Bungao, bukod na masyadong marayaw yung pagbisara niya Sinug. Kung minsan parang lamuran niya na Tagalog or English, something like that. So, on din mga variations, right? Sa language differences. So, una yung hinangon mo, again, go back to basic. Bang uno in language na manjari ka mo maghati, dito yung amoy ito yung gamitin nyo. Do not complicate things. Diba? Cultural barrier. Yung cultural barrier kasi, this is about, being culturally sensitive. So if, for example, in hambok kasi magbablock ka to hindi kita maghati if we refuse to acknowledge other people's culture. So, pinaka-importante talaga, para mas maghati kita nyo. Para kahatihan mo in listener sa makahati speaker, dapat you should be open to other people's perspective. Ibig sabihin nun, in values, iban beliefs sin dugayng tao, mahal ga, bera sab sin values, iban sin beliefs mo. So, kinakailangan talaga open-minded kita. With culture, we bring different communication styles. So, dapat nag-adjust din tayo. If you really want to become an effective communicator, one of the qualification is to be flexible. So, maingat ko mag-adjust. In communication style mo is aggressive, tapos yung kausap mo is passive, well, I'm not saying na magiging passive ka, but adjust ka naman, maging assertive ka. Pero huwag ka naman masyado na aggressive doon. Makaulong sabihin passive, right? So, kinakailangan, adjust din pag may time. That's number 2. Okay, before I move on to number 3, if you are watching right now, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the effort, Charis. And if you are new to this channel, then don't forget to click that like. And if you find this video helpful, then click that subscribe button. Thank you in advance, Charis. Anyway, moving on. Number 3. Ano yung number 3? This is yung tinatawag nilang physical barrier. Yung physical kasi, this is tangible, environmental factors. Ibig sabihin yung mga nakikita talaga. So, if you talk about physical, kasama na dyan yung noise, environmental conditions, yan. Ang mga kakitaan ta ma-feel ta talaga. So, physical separation, distance, yung layo, that's also part of the barrier. Okay, another is yung physical separation. Yun, yung physical separation, ibig sabihin bang, hindi mo nagbisaraya at tumalayo kay mo, it's either mag-ulak ka mo, kahunitan talaga ka mo maghati. So, uning solution, you go, it's either ikaw yung matukan niya, sumuok, atau siya yung mount kay mo. And you have to find a quiet place, and then you can talk it out para mas kahatihan niyo. Amo natin pag-ianan. Noise, amon mga karungugan ta. Sometimes, inside the classroom, nag-explain ma'am or nag-explain sir, pero naraig mo chismosa. Ayan, another distraction din yan. That's also physical. Another physical barrier is bang in room, in physical yung setting. For example, hambuk ko speaker, tapos nagkataon inside the room, na yung room yun, good for 30 persons lang. Tapos, hinang nila 16 halaw. Ibig sabihin, cramped. Parang masibi in space para tao. So, what happens? In mga tao, uncomfortable. Siyempre, piyaso na sila. Tapos, bukong pa siya well-ventilated. So, ikaw na yung makahati. Misan pa ko prepared na si mga speeches mo mahaba. Make it short. Pasal, misan pa ko magligaw, mahaba na yung mga bisara mo, nagkissa na ko, di na sila magdungog kayo mo. Pasal, very, mapasok to din hula. Diba? So, yun yung number 3, physical. Number 4 is mechanical barrier. Yung mechanical barrier, this is about yung mga sounds that we hear, yung mga mechanical sounds. Yan, tricycle, jeep, mga so, nakaka-distract din. Another is yung mechanical, yung for example, yung mga machinery. Nakatry na kayo? Nandiyan kayo sa loob ng bahay ninyo, parang nagmuni-muni ka, tapos nakikita ka TV, and then so sudden, nag-karaoke in haragbay, makusog tuod. So, di na ako makarungog sin TV, sound sa TV. So, it's either pungon mo, or pakusugon mo, or another option, mag-karaoke ka rin, para damay-damay na, charis. So, yun ang mga barriers sa effective communication. Why do we need to study these barriers? Why do we need to identify these barriers? Kasi, if you are able to identify yung barriers sa communication mo, you will be able to know kung ano yung solution. So like sinabi ko kanina, may tetuyas lang ka kung bagay ko kasi nga na-misinterpret niya. So maybe psychological, maybe kako it was just a joke pero sa kanya seryoso. So we need to understand those things kasi we have individual differences, right? So importante na in communication, before you interact, you need to look first or you need to identify first. Ano ba yung mga magiging problems mo? I'm not saying naman every time you have an interaction, always ko magpipikit sa uning problem. But syempre, you have to be aware na sometimes we do not understand each other not because words fail, but because the barriers occurred along the process sa communication natin. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you find something new na you've learned, and again, if you have some thoughts or experiences about barriers in your communication interaction, please feel free to share your thoughts below. I'm really very happy to hear from you. Thank you so much, guys. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.